We see all of our favorite guitarists with walls of amps behind them, and next thing you know, I recently saw Guthrie Govan and Neil Schon going on tour with only a modeler, and that's when I decided to stop using amps. I know what you must be thinking. Don't tube amps simply sound better? Yes, they do. And for years, I let the discussion end there. If tube amps sound better than a modeler, then there's absolutely no reason to get a modeler. But when I saw some of my favorite guitar players who are traditionally tube amp guys going on tour with just a modeler, I was forced to give them a second chance, and here's what I learned. The first thing that I had to realize is that a modeler is not trying to sound like an amp in the room. They are emulating the sound of a microphone on a speaker cabinet, so it's an unfair and inaccurate comparison to simply plug into your amp in the room, hear how it sounds, and then plug into a modeler and compare those two sounds. Of course, the amp in the room is going to sound much different than an emulation of a mic'd up amp. The second thing that I learned is that a modeler will output a much wider frequency range than an amp. They get way lower in frequency and way higher in frequency. So if you just go plug a modeler into a PA and you crank it up, it's gonna sound absolutely awful because you're gonna be hearing like 20,000 hertz, which is way too high. You don't hear that from an amp. And also you're gonna be hearing like 40 hertz, which is super low and boomy. The overall sound, if you just do that, sounds awful. What I learned on a modeler, put a low cut and put a high cut, cutting those super low lows off and then cutting the super high highs off, maybe down to 8 or 9K, sometimes even lower, just to cut those kind of annoying high frequencies and also cut those annoying low boomy frequencies that, you know, a guitar amp doesn't really have business being in. That's where the bass lies. Now, let's get to what really sold me about using a modeler. Gigging. With a modeler, you no longer have to bring an amp, a cabinet, a pedal board, a bunch of backup patch cables and guitar cables and power cables and all this stuff. You can simply just bring out your modeler, plug right into it, plug the power cord in, and then go XLR right to the board in your set. Doing that helps protect your tube amps, right? You no longer have to bring them out and risk it pouring down rain, damaging, somebody dropping them, somebody like spilling a beer on them or something. You don't have to load a heavy amp, a heavy cabinet. You don't have to hook all these cables up because you got an effects loop and you got the front of the amp and you got all these little patch cables that anything could happen. That one patch cable could go out and you have to go through every single cable. That's no longer a problem with a modeler. You show up, you have all your amps and cabs and effects and everything you could want in a little box. You plug in and you're good to go. Now, to finish off this video, I wanted to talk about what modeler I ended up settling on and kind of tell my story about using different modelers and things like that. First of all, I'm a tube amp guy. This video is not meant to say sell all your tube amps, get a modeler, it completely replaces it. I don't think a modeler does. I think tube amps are still the king. They absolutely sound the best. Modelers get close, but they're obviously not 100% there. But at the same time, I think a modeler saves a lot of situations. The wear and tear on an amp is not always necessary. The risk if you're playing an outside gig with the weather, anything could happen. I don't think it makes sense. And I do think modelers, or at least the modeler I settled on and liked the best, I think it gets 99% of the way there. In the past, I've tried the Kempers, I tried an HX Stomp, Helix kind of thing. I haven't yet tried a quad Cortex. And after seeing Neil Schon, I was like, you know what? I've never played a Fractal. I never knew anybody that even had a Fractal. I took the risk and I bought one online just to try it out. I ended up getting the Fractal FM3. Now, going back, a few years ago, I was doing a lot of corporate events and weddings and things like that. And a lot of guys were using Kempers and stuff like that. And I was like, okay, let me try a Kemper. I kind of thought I'd really like a Kemper because it's kind of taking a snapshot of an amp. It's a lot simpler. There's less tweaks and there's just a few effects, like really, delay, reverb, the important effects on there. And it's supposed to be taking a snapshot of a real amp. And I was like, okay, I love real amps. I love tube amps. You can just take a snapshot of it basically And I just did not find that to be the case. Especially, I would choose, you know, a certain amp that I thought I would like, and say I needed to go in there and make some minor adjustments to it. I don't know if it's because it's a profiler or what exactly about it. As I'm going in, you know, making EQ adjustments on the gain, the bass, the whatever, you know, I know what the real life counterpart of this amp, how it responds EQ-wise and everything like that. And on the Kemper, when I'd go touch maybe the mid knob, the mid range, try to adjust that, the EQ was completely different than a real amp. It was just like some separate EQ. The same thing with like the treble and the bass and the gain. Every knob did something random that a real amp would never do. And so I found myself endlessly trying to tweak and find the right sound, and just never being happy because just the EQ section was not set up to sound like a real amp in any way. Most of the time, I didn't even get to play. I was just sitting there trying to tweak like small parameters, and then until I just settled and I had to sell it. I played 2 gigs with it and they were awful. After the second gig, I was like, I'm getting rid of this. This thing sounds awful. I just can't be happy with how it sounds. It's marketed as it sounds like an amp, or you're just taking a photo of an amp, which it probably does take a, you know, kind of a snapshot of an amp in that situation. However, if you ever need to get in there to tweak, or if you want to put an overdrive pedal on there, the parameters on the overdrives and the amps and everything like that do nothing of how they do in real life. And so I just can never find like my sweet spot of the sound I liked. Fast forward, I start using my Marshall Jubilee into a 112. I'm gigging with that, some delay and reverb and a boost in the effects loop. And then I got like an overdrive, a phaser, a wah, different things in the front of the amp. And that's what I was gigging, just straight up amp, miking it up with an SM57, doing it, sounded absolutely fantastic. Well, eventually I saw the HX Stomp XL. I'm like, that seems pretty cool, because what I was kind of lacking in my rig was kind of a backup component. What if the amp wasn't working, something blew, like a tube or something, or, you know, some venues are super noisy and things like that. And I wanted something that I could use as a backup. So I went and got the HX Stomp XL, and I made some patches that sounded pretty good, that if something went wrong, I could easily get through the show with, you know, those few patches. What ended up happening is I started actually using it for cable method with my Jubilee, using that exclusively for the effects, overdrive, phaser, chorus, compressor, different delays, like all this different stuff. So I just show up to the gig with my amp, and then I'd forward cable method with the HX Stomp, still miking up the amp and all that. And that's what I used for a while, and I was pretty happy with the effects in the HX Stomp, or leagues ahead of the Kemper in my opinion. HX Stomp XL, I don't know what the price is, but they're around like $600-700 maybe. I think I'm right on that. And so to me at that price range, absolute steal. And then you get the backup component of running direct, and you know, having amp simulations and speaker simulations and all that kind of good stuff. Well, eventually I was like, you know what, I want to try gigging just direct. You know, I see all these guys doing this. I would love to figure out how to be happy with that kind of setup. The Kemper was like $1,800 or something like this. I got the HX Stomp XL for, I don't know, $600-700, so way more than half the price. And I promise it sounds way better. It reacts even better than the Kemper. Like if I wanted to make an adjustment EQ-wise, the amp you choose sounds way more and reacts way more like real life than the Kemper does. Same thing with effects. The effects are leagues ahead of the Kemper for such a cheap price. The HX Stomp for $600-700 is unbelievable. So I started doing a few gigs, going direct with that, and I was pretty happy. But I still always had the urge to tweak more, like on the EQ and this, trying to find the right sound. And I never was fully settled and happy with what I was doing. Every day I'd play through it. I'm like, okay, I like this. I can play gigs with this, but I'm not fully content with how it sounds. And that leads me to the Fractal. You know, I saw Neil Sean, who I just love Neil Sean's playing. I love his tone. And he used to be the type of guy that would be bringing multiple tube amps out, going stereo rigs and doing all this crazy stuff, sounding super epic live. Same thing with Guthrie Govan. Guthrie Govan obviously is a crazy shred player, but his tone's pretty rocking, and he's typically a tube amp guy. And they both, around a year ago or two from currently, you know, shooting this video, they went on tour with the Fractal FM9. I do some research. The FM3 is basically the FM9. And at the same time, the FM9 is like a super long wait list or something like that. And so you can't really try it out, and you gotta wait however long. I put my name on the FM9 wait list. I never even tried a Fractal yet. I've never played a Fractal at this point. The only thing I've played is Kemper and HX Stomp and a few older modelers from a long time ago. I was like, you know what? I'm gonna get the FM3. They have it in stock, $1,100, and I got it. And I was watching videos online of the what is it, like the presets, built-in presets, and I'm like, these things sound pretty awesome. Like if it sounds like that in real life, that's gonna be unbelievable. Well, I get it, I run through the presets and it sounds just like it does on the videos, actually better, you know, because YouTube's not compressing it in real life. And I'm like, wow, instantly out of the box, this thing completely smokes the Kemper and the HX Stomp. And one thing I was kind of worried about with the Fractal, it's the most kind of tweakable, like you can nerd out a lot on frequencies and different parameters of things. And I was worried that I was just going to be tweaking like way more than even the Kemper or the HX Stomp. But surprisingly, the opposite happened. So I literally got it, I made my first patch. And my first patch was me trying to completely just copy and paste my actual rig. So I pulled up a Jubilee. I pulled up a Marshall 412 with a 57. I pulled up a tube screamer. I pulled up a delay and a reverb. And I literally tried to emulate the reverb to sound like my reverb pedal, the delay to sound like my delay pedal, the tube screamer, everything. I try to get it to sound like it. And it pretty much instantly sounded the way it sounded in real life. Just instant, right when I pulled it up, everything was perfect. And then the best thing is when I go make an adjustment on my tube screamer, it reacts like a tube screamer that I'm used to actually, you know, adjusting in real life. When I go adjust the treble or the presence knob on the Jubilee emulation, it reacts just like a real Jubilee does. So I felt at home instantly. And after a few days, I was content with my patch. I had it set up. Everything, and I say a few days. I wasn't spending like I wasn't spending like 10 hours a day on it. It was nothing like that. I was just going through a little bit here, making tweaks. I don't know. A week or so later, I had this gig coming up. It's at a festival. I think it was a 45-minute long show. A lot of other bands have been playing on and off. They have an amp on stage. A lot of guys are just bringing their pedal board, plug into the amp, and I'm like, you know what? I've never gigged this thing, but I'm pretty happy with how it sounds so far. Let me go take it out, and if it sounds bad, it sounds bad. If it sounds good, sounds good. You know, we find out right now. So I bring out, it's a Fractal FM3. It's super tiny. I don't have it. I don't have it in my hands right now, unfortunately. But it's got 3 buttons on there. I'm not gonna get too much into the details though, because I want to make a separate video talking about it. I bring it in a little box. I literally have a power cable, guitar cable, and an XLR. I show up. The other band's getting off the stage. I show up, put the pedal down, plug in my cables. Takes about 30 seconds, literally. Turn it on, and we do a quick sound check, and it sounds fantastic. Like, instantly sounds great. It sounds like my Jubilee's on the stage right there. And so we play the 45-minute show or whatever. It's just going great. I've never played with a modeler and on stage felt happy with how it sounds. I was always losing something, right? I would do it sometimes just to experiment with it. I was always like, felt like I was missing out something with a feel of, you know, how it felt playing with stuff like that. Or tone-wise, like I was always, you know, I was losing something. But I didn't feel like that. It just felt at home. I felt comfortable, and it sounded like my amp, literally. I wasn't able to hear how it sounded out front. So thankfully, my wife got some videos. Before I could even listen to those, I'm unloading after the show, and about five plus people like randomly came up to me and was like, dude, what are you using? Your tone is absolutely incredible. And they were flipping out. They were like asking me what, you know, pedals and what amps I'm using. I'm like, it's literally just this Fractal FM3 here. I don't get compliments very often about my tone after a show, but I thought that was very interesting. And then I listened back to the videos, which is not always the best representation, but it's pretty good. I listened back to the videos that my wife got, and I was like, wow, it sounds really, really good. None of the overly high pitch sounds or the lows. It literally sounds like I had a Jubilee on the stage and I mic'd it up with the 57, and that's what you're hearing out front. I've played countless gigs after that, and every single gig has had the Fractal FM3. I've never not used that because it gets me 99% of the, I say 99% of the way, just in case there was a moment of doubt. It might get me completely 100% of the way there on stage, but I'll say 99% just to kind of say that. And so now every gig since then, I've literally only brought out the Fractal FM3, and I'm super happy. I've literally, since I got it and I made that first patch, haven't touched it. It's literally the same patch. I'm happy with it. It feels good. It sounds good. I haven't made a single adjustment yet. Now that's live. To me, that's where the modeler is, specifically the Fractal modeler. I can't speak on the Quad Cortex. I could speak on the Helix and the Kemper. I personally didn't like those. Some people love those. I don't support those. I don't recommend those, but the Fractal, HX X3, FM9, FM3, absolutely outstanding. They get 99% to 100% of a tube amp feel on stage, just in a little box. In the studio, however, I 100% hear a difference. I feel a difference when I'm in my studio recording. It gets 93 to 95% of the way there. It doesn't fully get to it. You know, you're cranking up your amp in the studio situation, mic'd up, listening to it. In that situation, I can hear a little bit more nuances of the tube amp compared to the modeler. But live, I really think the nuances diminish. I've plugged my amp, it sounds amazing. Some random person's running sound through their sound system, and I could have been playing like a Line 6 Spider from like 2008 or something, because they were just running it through the worst stuff possible, having it EQ'd all messed up and things like that. So that's definitely a component of it. But in the studio, it doesn't get fully the way there, but it gets probably 95, 93% of the way there. But the plus side is, if I wanted the sound of a Fender Deluxe Reverb, a Friedman, a Soldano, I don't know, a 2-Rock amp, I don't even have to own those amps, and I can get 93 to 95% of the way there, tone-wise, which is absolutely incredible in the studio. Now that 93 to 95 I'm talking about in the studio, I'm literally comparing my Jubilee to the Jubilee emulation. And so that's where I'm getting these kind of nuanced figures here. But live, like I said, there's so many other factors happening. I think it's basically identical. I don't think there's a difference. So I'll just say 99% of the way there. And so I just want to wrap up the video. If you are a tube amp guy like I am, in your gigging or you're in the studio, I think there's absolutely a reason to get a modeler. Don't come in with the mindset that this is supposed to completely eliminate your tube amps, because it will not. But if you are wanting to lighten your load going to gigs, you don't want to load out, bring out very, very, very expensive amps and cabinets and have to mic up things and run your pedals. I mean, it's very easy to bring out like a $5,000 rig, if you add up all the pedals and the cables and the power supplies and the amps and the speakers, the microphones, you start adding all this up, it's super expensive. It's something gets stolen, bad weather, all these things happens. It's just, I think it's better to keep those at the house, have fun with them, record with them at the house. But going out, you can just bring something simple, small, like an HX Stomp XL, FM3, FM9, something like that, and you'll get literally 99 to 100% of the tone. Like, it really ends up being much cheaper and safer, and you're getting the tone. And also, if you're like in a cover band, you don't have to go buy like a bunch of choruses and compressors and delays and auto wah to kind of get the the sound of the show. It's all in one box. You're ready to go. It's all built in. You just make a little patch, a preset, and it sounds fantastic. That's why I stopped using amps. Like I said, I literally haven't used my amp live since, and that was probably October or so of 2022. It's right now, it's June 2023. Haven't used it, and I haven't felt the need to. Like, I've been completely happy and content. At home, I'll plug in my tube amp sometimes, but oftentimes I'll just plug right into my Fractal, and I'm not missing anything. So if you're on the fence about modelers, hopefully this kind of changed your perspective. And also, I will say this, if you are a modeler guy and you think there's no reason for a tube amp, there 100% is a reason for a tube amp. It is diminishing as the technology gets better, but there is nothing like plugging into a great tube amp in the room. I just don't think it's worth bringing out to a gig anymore. I think modelers are at the point where gigging with the tube amps, there's not much benefit. If there's any benefit. I don't know what the benefit would be, honestly. All right, well, I hope this helps you guys out, and I'll see you guys next time.